True freedom lies within you. Buddhist wisdom. Throughout history, human beings have longed for freedom. From the struggles of societies against oppressive rulers to the personal battles we fight within ourselves against fear, attachment, and desire, freedom has always been the ultimate aspiration. Yet when we look closely, we discover that most people define freedom only in external terms. Freedom from political constraints, freedom from financial burdens, freedom from social restrictions. These are important dimensions, but they remain incomplete. True freedom, as the Buddhist tradition teaches, is not determined by the outer circumstances of life, but by the inner state of the mind and heart. Buddhism has always pointed toward the truth that liberation is found within. The Buddha himself, after years of ascetic practices and wandering, realized under the Bodhi tree that freedom from suffering was not about changing the world, but about transforming one's own relationship with it. The chains that bind us are not made of iron, but of craving, ignorance, and aversion. When these chains are dissolved through wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, the individual discovers a vastness of being that no external force can touch. This text, "True freedom lies within you, Buddhist wisdom," is a deep exploration into the essence of inner liberation. It's not about denying the value of outer freedoms, but about showing that without an inner foundation, outer liberty often remains fragile and incomplete. Many who live in free societies are still prisoners of their own minds. Many who enjoy wealth, power, or independence still feel enslaved to anxiety, anger, or dissatisfaction. And many who have lost everything still radiate serenity and fearlessness because they have touched the truth within themselves that cannot be destroyed. We will examine 5 central dimensions of inner freedom as explained and inspired by Buddhist teachings. Each dimension reveals not only the barriers that keep us trapped, but also the practices and perspectives that can open the door to true liberation. These are not abstract philosophies. They are living insights meant to be practiced in daily life. To walk the Buddhist path is to continuously return to the source within, to discover that the prison of suffering was never locked from the outside, and to step freely into the boundless present moment. Let us begin this journey together by looking at the first and most essential step, the recognition that the prison is the mind itself and that liberation begins with awareness. The mind as the true prison, awareness as the key to liberation. When we consider the idea of freedom, most people instinctively imagine outer conditions, the ability to move where we want, speak what we believe, or live according to our values without interference. But Buddhism begins by pointing out that the most pervasive prison we inhabit is not built by governments or societies, but by our own minds. The walls of this prison are made of craving and aversion, and the bars are formed by ignorance. No matter how much external freedom we achieve, if our minds remain bound by these inner forces, we remain enslaved. To understand this, imagine someone who has all the wealth, possessions, and opportunities that society can offer. They can travel anywhere, enjoy every comfort, and experience pleasures that many dream about. Yet within themselves, they are consumed by constant worry, fear of losing what they have, dissatisfaction with what they lack, envy of others, and anger when life doesn't go their way. Is such a person free? Outwardly, yes. They have power and independence. Inwardly, no. They are trapped in a cage of endless desire and fear. This is the very cage the Buddha saw in the human condition, the cycle of samsara, the wheel of suffering that turns endlessly because of the ignorance of our true nature. The first step to inner freedom is awareness. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness not as a luxury, but as the fundamental key to liberation. Why? Because without awareness, we are enslaved by our automatic reactions. When anger arises, it takes hold of us. When desire appears, it drives us. When fear surfaces, it paralyzes us. We believe these emotions are who we are, so we obey them blindly. But mindfulness introduces a radical shift. It allows us to step back and observe. Ah, this is anger arising. This is desire passing through. This is fear appearing. In that moment of observation, a space opens. We are no longer prisoners of the emotion. We are the witness of it. Consider the metaphor of clouds and the sky. Most of us identify with the clouds, the storm of thoughts, the thunder of emotions, the rain of cravings and aversions. When a storm rages, we believe the whole world is dark and hopeless. But mindfulness reveals that we are not the clouds, we are the sky itself. The sky is vast, spacious, unbound. The clouds come and go within it, but the sky remains untouched. In the same way, awareness reveals that our true nature is not the passing storms of the mind, but the open, spacious presence that observes them. This recognition is the beginning of freedom. Yet cultivating this awareness is not easy. The habits of identification with thought and emotion are deeply ingrained. From childhood, we are conditioned to believe, I am my anger, I am my fear, I am my desire. This identification is the glue that keeps the prison walls intact. To dissolve it, we need consistent practice. Meditation becomes the training ground for this awareness. By sitting quietly and observing the breath, we learn to see thoughts as thoughts, sensations as sensations, emotions as emotions. We learn to experience their impermanence. They arise, stay for a while, and pass away. As this insight deepens, we begin to see that we are not bound by them. Awareness also uncovers the deeper structures of the prison, craving and aversion. The Buddha described these as the two great forces that drive the wheel of suffering. When we crave, we cling to what we want, believing it will complete us. When we feel aversion, we resist what we don't want, believing it will destroy us. Both are forms of ignorance because they assume that freedom lies in manipulating external conditions. But awareness shows us that both craving and aversion are simply movements of the mind. They do not define us. When we see them clearly, their power weakens. Take, for example, the craving for recognition. Many people feel trapped in a cycle of needing approval from others. They work tirelessly, not because they enjoy the work, but because they want to be admired. Their happiness depends on the opinions of others, and so they are never truly free. But when mindfulness shines its light on this craving, the person begins to notice. Here is the desire for recognition. It arises because of insecurity. It passes like any other thought. By seeing it as an impersonal event rather than as their identity, they loosen the chains that bound them. Or consider aversion, such as anger at someone who has wronged us. Without awareness, anger controls us completely. It dictates our words, poisons our relationships, and disturbs our peace. But with awareness we pause. This is anger. It is hot. It is painful. It is impermanent. We no longer have to act on it. The awareness itself is already freedom. This practice of awareness is not about suppressing emotions or pretending they do not exist. It is about recognizing their true nature. Thoughts and emotions are like visitors in the house of the mind. Without awareness, we hand them the keys and let them rule our home. With awareness, we greet them at the door, acknowledge their presence, and allow them to leave when their time is done. The house remains ours. In this way, awareness becomes the master key that unlocks the prison. Once we recognize that we are not our passing mental states, we begin to taste freedom. The Buddha described this freedom as nibbana, the extinguishing of the fire of craving and aversion. It is not annihilation, but liberation, a profound peace that comes when the mind no longer burns with grasping. The implications of this insight are vast. It means that no matter what external circumstances we face, whether in prosperity or poverty, health or sickness, praise or blame, we can remain inwardly free. A prisoner behind bars who has cultivated awareness may experience more inner peace than a wealthy ruler consumed by craving. A sick person who observes their pain without clinging may be freer than a healthy person who lives in fear of illness. The conditions of life may limit the body, but awareness reveals that the mind can remain limitless. As we continue this journey into Buddhist wisdom, let us remember, the path to freedom is not about destroying the world outside, but about awakening the world within. Awareness is the first and most essential step. When we learn to observe our minds without judgment, without attachment, and without resistance, we take the first step out of the prison of suffering and into the boundless space of true liberation. If you found wisdom in this reflection and wish to continue walking the path of inner freedom with us, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your journey toward true liberation is just beginning, and together we can deepen these insights with every step. When awareness has been cultivated to the point where one can observe the rising and falling of thoughts and emotions without being consumed by them, the journey toward true freedom naturally turns toward the recognition of impermanence. In Buddhism, impermanence is not merely a philosophical idea, but a direct insight into the nature of reality. Everything that arises also passes away. The body changes, the seasons shift, relationships evolve, societies transform, and even the most stubborn mountains eventually erode under the forces of time. What the Buddha emphasized, however, was not just the external impermanence of the world, but the inner impermanence of our mental and emotional states. To recognize this truth deeply is to loosen the grip of attachment, and to loosen attachment is to discover the freedom that cannot be shaken by the tides of change. The prison of the mind is built not only from ignorance of our awareness, but also from our clinging to permanence, where none exists. We long for relationships to last forever, for health to remain unbroken, for success to be eternal, for loved ones to never leave us. We want the seasons of life to be controlled by our desires rather than by their own unfolding. This clinging creates suffering because reality never conforms to our illusions. The very nature of life is transience, and yet we resist it with all our strength. Freedom comes not when we control impermanence, but when we embrace it. Think of the experience of youth. Many cling to their youthful energy, beauty, and opportunities as if they were fixed treasures that could be kept through sheer effort. Yet the mirror eventually reveals wrinkles, the body weakens, and the opportunities of youth give way to the responsibilities of age. If one resists these changes, suffering arises, bitterness, resentment, fear. But if one recognizes impermanence as the natural flow of existence, then aging becomes not a curse, but a profound teacher. It reveals the truth that nothing was ever truly ours to possess, and in that letting go, a lightness appears. The Buddha's teaching of impermanence, or anicca, is not meant to depress, but to liberate. It is a reminder that clinging to what cannot last is the cause of sorrow, and that peace comes through surrender to the flow. Consider a person who clings desperately to a failing relationship. The more they fight against the natural dissolution, the more pain they create. But when they finally accept the reality that the relationship has run its course, a deep release follows. The grief may still be present, but it no longer imprisons them. They can breathe again, they can live again. Impermanence, seen clearly, does not rob us of life. It gives us life anew in each moment. Meditation reveals this truth with striking clarity. When one sits in mindfulness, paying close attention to the breath, one begins to notice that each inhalation arises and passes away. Each exhalation follows and disappears. Thoughts arise, linger briefly, and dissolve. Emotions swell like waves and then recede. Even pain in the body, when observed closely, is not a fixed thing, but a series of sensations that come and go. The mind, previously convinced that everything is solid and permanent, begins to see reality as a dance of arising and vanishing. This insight is liberating, because it undermines the illusion of permanence, the very illusion that keeps us clinging. One of the greatest causes of human suffering is the belief that happiness depends on securing something permanent. We chase after possessions, believing they will bring lasting satisfaction. We long for social recognition, hoping it will provide enduring self-worth. We seek pleasure, thinking it will remain forever sweet. But each time, the satisfaction fades. The possession becomes old, the recognition is forgotten, the pleasure turns into craving for more. This endless cycle, which Buddhism calls samsara, is fueled by our refusal to accept impermanence. When we see that everything is transient, we no longer expect permanence from impermanent things. We begin to appreciate them for what they are, fleeting experiences, without enslaving ourselves to them. Take, for example, the blooming of a flower. If one clings to the flower, wanting it never to wither, suffering is inevitable. The petals will fall, the fragrance will fade, the beauty will pass. But if one accepts that the flower is beautiful precisely because it is impermanent, then one can enjoy it deeply while it lasts and let it go gracefully when it fades. In the same way, every moment of life becomes precious when seen through the lens of impermanence. Joy is heightened, appreciation is deepened, and suffering is softened. Yet it is not only joy and beauty that are impermanent. Suffering, too, is impermanent. When pain arises, whether physical or emotional, the mind tends to despair, imagining that it will last forever. But impermanence assures us that no storm is eternal. Every sorrow, every hardship, every wound eventually transforms. This insight provides immense resilience. When we encounter difficulties, instead of collapsing under them, we can remind ourselves, this too shall pass. In doing so, we remain free even amidst suffering because we know it is temporary. The Buddha's teaching of impermanence is closely connected to his teaching of non-self, or anatta. Just as external things are impermanent, so too is the sense of I. What we call the self is not a fixed entity, but a collection of changing processes, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness, all in constant flux. When we cling to a permanent self, we suffer, because reality continuously contradicts our illusion. But when we see the self as impermanent like everything else, we begin to loosen our grasp. This loosening is not nihilism, but liberation. We realize that we do not need to defend or preserve a fixed identity. We are free to flow with life, to change, to grow, to dissolve without fear. The freedom that comes from embracing impermanence is profound. It frees us from fear of loss because we no longer expect things to last. It frees us from the burden of clinging because we no longer grasp what is destined to change. It frees us from despair because we know that suffering too will fade. And it frees us from the illusion of self because we see that identity is not a prison, but a river. This freedom transforms the way we live. Instead of anxiously holding on to each experience, we learn to let it flow through us. Instead of fearing change, we welcome it as the natural rhythm of life. Instead of seeking permanence in impermanent things, we rest in the only true refuge, the awareness that observes all change, but is not itself bound by it. That awareness, vast and timeless, is the essence of true freedom. Imagine standing by a river. If you try to grasp the water with your hands, it slips through your fingers and leaves you frustrated. But if you simply watch it flow, you enjoy its beauty without struggle. Life is the same. We suffer when we try to hold on to its flow, but we find peace when we let it move freely. Impermanence is not our enemy. It is the very teacher that guides us to release, to acceptance, to serenity. The greatest masters of Buddhist practice often radiate a profound lightness, a joy that seems unshaken by circumstances. This joy does not come because life always gives them what they want. It comes because they have stopped demanding permanence from life. They see every moment as a gift, every change as natural, every loss as part of the great unfolding. They are free not because they control life, but because they flow with it. To integrate this wisdom into daily life requires practice. Each time something arises, whether joy or sorrow, we can remind ourselves this is impermanent. Each time we find ourselves clinging, we can practice letting go. Each time we encounter change, we can welcome it instead of resisting. Slowly, the mind learns to rest in the truth of impermanence. Slowly, freedom deepens. This practice does not make us cold or detached. On the contrary, it makes us more present and more loving. When we know that every moment is fleeting, we cherish it more. When we know that every person may not be with us forever, we love them more deeply while they are here. When we know that even suffering will pass, we endure it with patience and compassion. Impermanence, when embraced, enriches life rather than diminishing it. Thus, the recognition of impermanence is the second great step toward true freedom. It is not something to be believed intellectually, but to be realized experientially. Meditation, mindfulness, and the practice of presence are the tools by which this realization grows. With each breath observed, with each thought noticed, with each change accepted, the prison of clinging dissolved. We no longer resist the truth of life, we flow with it. And in that flow we discover a freedom that cannot be taken away. If this teaching has touched you and you wish to continue receiving deep wisdom for your own path, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Together, we can keep exploring the truths that liberate the heart and mind. When awareness has been cultivated and impermanence has been deeply recognized, the path to true inner freedom naturally turns toward the understanding of attachment and the profound release that comes from letting go. In the Buddhist tradition, attachment is identified as one of the root causes of suffering, a subtle but relentless force that ties us to dissatisfaction and chains us to the wheel of existence. Liberation, then, requires that we come to see the nature of attachment clearly and begin the courageous practice of releasing it. To speak of letting go is not to speak of indifference or denial of life, but rather of discovering a way of relating to life that is free from grasping, free from fear, and free from the illusions that keep us enslaved. Attachment manifests in countless forms. It is the clinging to possessions, the obsession with reputation, the grasping at relationships, the dependence on praise, the addiction to pleasure, the fixation on control, and even the attachment to our own ideas of who we are. On the surface, attachment often masquerades as love, commitment, or passion, but beneath it lies fear, fear of losing, fear of change, fear of emptiness. We attach because we believe that without the object of our clinging, we cannot be whole. We imagine that happiness lies outside ourselves, bound to particular people, situations, or things, and so we hold on desperately, trying to secure permanence in a world where nothing is permanent. The inevitable result is suffering. Consider the example of someone deeply attached to material wealth. They may accumulate riches, properties, and possessions, believing each new acquisition will bring security and joy. Yet with each possession comes the burden of protecting it, the anxiety of losing it, the envy of those who have more, and the insatiable craving for more still. The treasure that was supposed to bring freedom becomes a chain. This does not mean that possessions are inherently evil, but that the mind's clinging to them creates bondage. True freedom arises not from having or not having, but from being free of the craving itself. Attachment also binds us in relationships. Love, when infused with attachment, becomes fragile, anxious, and often destructive. We cling to partners, friends, or family members, demanding that they never change, never leave, never die. We confuse their presence with our identity, and when they inevitably change or depart, our hearts break in agony. But when we love without attachment, love becomes spacious and liberating. We can cherish the presence of others deeply without demanding that they fulfill our every need. We can grieve their absence without being shattered, because we know that the essence of love is not possession, but presence, not control, but acceptance. Even our own identities are objects of attachment. We cling to the idea of being successful, intelligent, attractive, or spiritual. When circumstances threaten these identities, we feel lost and unworthy. The ego is perhaps the greatest attachment of all. We grasp at the illusion of a fixed self, defending it fiercely, comparing it constantly, feeding it endlessly. Yet the self is not a permanent entity, but a fluid process, a constellation of conditions always changing. To cling to it is to fight reality. To release it is to taste freedom. The practice of letting go, however, is not a single act, but a lifelong discipline. It begins with awareness, noticing the ways in which we cling. Whenever we find ourselves anxious, fearful, or resentful, it is usually a sign that attachment is at work. We want things to be other than they are, and the gap between reality and desire creates suffering. The moment we notice this dynamic, we have the opportunity to loosen our grip. We can ask ourselves, what am I clinging to right now? Is this clinging bringing peace, or is it creating suffering? Often, the mere recognition of attachment is enough to soften it. Meditation offers a profound training ground for this practice. As we sit and observe the flow of thoughts, we inevitably notice the mind clinging to pleasant sensations, to thoughts of the past, to fantasies of the future. Each time we notice and return to the present, we practice letting go. At first, the attachments may seem small, like the thought of what we will eat later or the memory of an argument. But as the practice deepens, we begin to notice the deeper attachments, the clinging to self-image, the resistance to impermanence, the craving for existence itself. Meditation becomes a rehearsal for life, learning to release what arises instead of grasping it, learning to meet each moment with openness instead of control. The paradox of letting go is that it brings not loss, but gain. When we release our grip, we make space for joy, peace, and compassion to flourish. Imagine holding a handful of sand. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. The looser your hand, the more gently it rests in your palm. Life is the same. When we cling tightly to it, trying to control every outcome, we end up losing the very peace we seek. But when we loosen our grasp, life rests more gently with us. Letting go does not mean passivity or neglect. It does not mean abandoning responsibilities or denying desires. Rather, it means engaging fully with life while remaining free from the chains of clinging. We can work diligently without being enslaved to success. We can love deeply without being consumed by fear of loss. We can enjoy pleasure without becoming addicted to it. This balance, engagement without attachment, is the essence of Buddhist wisdom. There is also the subtle attachment to spiritual practice itself. Many seekers fall into the trap of craving enlightenment, clinging to the idea of liberation as another possession to acquire. They compare their progress with others, judge themselves harshly, and grasp at peak experiences. Yet this too is bondage. The Buddha warned against turning the Dharma into an object of attachment. The teachings are like a raft used to cross a river. Once the river is crossed, one does not carry the raft on one's back. The point of practice is release, not clinging to practice itself. The fruits of letting go are visible in the lives of those who embody this wisdom. Such people radiate serenity. They move through the world with ease, unshaken by praise or blame, success or failure, gain or loss. They are not cold or indifferent, but profoundly alive and compassionate because their hearts are no longer bound by fear. They can give freely because they are not attached to possession. They can forgive because they are not attached to resentment. They can live fully because they are not attached to permanence. This is the freedom of the awakened mind. One of the most powerful illustrations of this freedom is found in the lives of Buddhist monks and nuns who renounce possessions and status to dedicate themselves to practice. While outsiders may see their lives as lacking, many of them radiate joy and peace that eludes those in the midst of abundance. Their joy arises not from deprivation, but from release. By letting go of clinging, they have discovered the richness that lies within. This is not a path for everyone in its literal form, but the principle applies universally. The less we cling, the freer we are. Practicing letting go in daily life requires mindfulness, courage, and compassion. Mindfulness allows us to notice clinging as it arises, Courage empowers us to loosen our grip, even when fear tells us to hold tighter. Compassion softens the process, reminding us to be gentle with ourselves, for letting go is not easy. It is a gradual process, like untangling a knot. Each small release is a victory, each act of surrender a step toward freedom. As we continue to explore this teaching, it becomes clear that letting go is not about losing, but about finding. When we release attachment, we find peace. When we let go of control, we find trust. When we loosen the grip on self, we find spaciousness. The prison of attachment dissolves, and we stand in the vast open field of liberation. The heart becomes light, the mind becomes clear, and life becomes a flowing dance rather than a desperate struggle. In the end, the greatest attachment we release is the illusion of separateness. We cling to the idea that we are separate from others, from nature, from the universe. This illusion creates fear and grasping. But as awareness deepens and attachment dissolves, we begin to see our interconnectedness. We realize that nothing truly belongs to us, because everything is part of the great web of existence. In this realization, the need to cling falls away naturally. We rest in the truth that we are not isolated beings struggling to secure fragments of happiness, but expressions of a vast, interconnected reality. Letting go is not the end of life, but the beginning of life, truly lived. It is the door that opens to compassion, wisdom, and serenity. It is the path to the freedom that cannot be shaken by the storms of change. And it is within reach of anyone willing to practice, moment by moment, breath by breath, the art of release. If you have found meaning in this reflection and wish to continue walking the path of freedom and wisdom with us, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Each step forward deepens the journey, and together we can keep discovering the truths that liberate the mind and heart. The journey toward true freedom within, after cultivating awareness, embracing impermanence, and practicing the release of attachment, naturally deepens into the cultivation of compassion and loving kindness. For in Buddhism, liberation is not merely a private escape from suffering, but a transformation of the heart that opens fully to the world. Freedom is incomplete if it does not flower into compassion, for the awakened mind is not only free from its own chains, but also vibrates with the understanding of the interconnectedness of all beings. Compassion is the fragrance of freedom, the natural expression of a heart that no longer clings to self-centered illusions. It is in this dimension that inner liberation becomes a force for healing, peace, and boundless connection. To understand why compassion is central to true freedom, we must consider the nature of suffering. The Buddha's first noble truth proclaims that suffering is woven into the fabric of human existence. Everyone experiences loss, pain, aging, death, disappointment, and fear. When one is blinded by attachment and ignorance, this suffering becomes a source of bitterness and isolation. But when one sees reality clearly, suffering becomes the bond that unites all beings. Every living creature longs for happiness and struggles against pain. Recognizing this shared condition opens the heart. Compassion arises when we realize that our own longing for freedom is inseparable from the longing of others. This realization transforms the meaning of freedom. Without compassion, one might pursue liberation only for oneself, seeking to escape the world and its burdens. But Buddhism reveals that the self and the world are not separate. To liberate oneself is to also participate in the liberation of all beings. The Bodhisattva ideal embodies this truth, a being who vows to awaken not only for their own sake, but for the sake of all. In this vow, we see that freedom is not isolation, but communion, not withdrawal, but engagement, not indifference, but love. Compassion is the ultimate expression of the recognition that we are not separate islands but waves of the same ocean. Compassion does not mean pity or condescension. Pity sees the other as weak, as below, while true compassion recognizes the shared humanity, the shared struggle, the shared possibility of awakening. Compassion arises not from superiority, but from empathy. It is the ability to feel with another, to step into their suffering, and to respond with kindness. When the mind is bound by attachment to self, compassion is limited, conditional, and selective. We show it only to those who serve our interests or those with whom we identify. But when the self is loosened, compassion expands without limit. It becomes unconditional, extending to all beings without exception. This boundless compassion is what Buddhism calls metta, or loving kindness. Cultivating compassion is both natural and intentional. On one level, compassion is the natural response of a heart free from clinging. On another level, it is something that must be cultivated through practice, because the habits of selfishness and indifference are deeply ingrained. Meditation practices such as loving kindness meditation, where one systematically generates feelings of goodwill toward oneself and others, are designed to train the heart in compassion. At first, the practice may feel artificial. Repeating phrases such as, "May I be happy, may you be happy, may all beings be happy," can seem mechanical. But with persistence, the heart begins to soften. One begins to genuinely wish well, even to those one dislikes, even to strangers, even to enemies. Slowly, the circle of compassion widens until it includes all beings without discrimination. This expansion of compassion is itself a form of freedom. When the heart is confined by hatred, anger, or resentment, we live in bondage. These emotions poison the mind, chaining us to bitterness and robbing us of peace. But when we release them and replace them with compassion, we feel lighter, freer, more spacious. To forgive, for instance, is not to condone wrongdoing, but to free oneself from the prison of hatred. Compassion dissolves the walls that isolate us, liberating us into the vastness of shared humanity. In this way, compassion is not only a gift to others, but also the deepest gift we give ourselves. Consider how suffering transforms when met with compassion. A person in pain who feels alone may drown in despair. But when someone extends compassion, their suffering is eased, not necessarily because the pain disappears, but because the burden of isolation is lifted. Compassion creates connection, and connection creates healing. In our own lives, when we meet our own suffering with self-compassion rather than self-criticism, we soften the harshness of our inner prison. We become allies to ourselves rather than enemies. Freedom lies not in denying suffering, but in holding it with compassion. Compassion also brings clarity to the understanding of karma. The actions we take, driven by attachment or aversion, ripple outward, affecting not only ourselves but others. When the heart is bound by selfishness, our actions create harm, and that harm reverberates back into our lives. But when the heart is freed into compassion, our actions create benefit, and that benefit ripples outward, creating peace in ourselves and in others. Compassion is therefore both the fruit of freedom and the path to deeper freedom, because each act of kindness dissolves a little more of the illusion of separateness. The greatest teachers of Buddhism often embody compassion in profound ways. Stories of the Buddha himself emphasize his tireless efforts to alleviate suffering, not only through teaching but through direct acts of kindness. Whether comforting the sick, guiding the lost, or calming disputes, his compassion flowed naturally from his realization of interconnectedness. Later, masters continued this tradition, offering not only wisdom but also boundless care to those in need. To walk the path of freedom is to follow in their footsteps, not only in meditation halls but in daily life, where every interaction becomes an opportunity to embody compassion. Compassion does not mean we ignore injustice or avoid conflict. On the contrary, it calls us to respond to suffering with courage and wisdom. But unlike anger, which seeks to destroy, compassion seeks to heal. When rooted in compassion, even the struggle against injustice is free from hatred. One acts firmly, even fiercely if necessary, but without malice. This balance is the essence of freedom in action, to confront suffering without being consumed by it, to resist harm without losing one's heart. Cultivating compassion in daily life requires mindfulness. Each moment presents opportunities to respond with either selfishness or kindness. Do we snap at the driver who cuts us off, or do we wish them safety on their journey? Do we ignore the colleague who struggles, or do we offer a word of support? Do we condemn ourselves for mistakes, or do we hold ourselves with gentle understanding? Each choice builds habits of heart. Slowly, through practice, compassion becomes our natural response. And with it comes the joy of connection, the serenity of freedom from hatred, the vastness of a heart open to all. Ultimately, compassion reveals the deepest dimension of freedom, the freedom to love without fear. Most of our attempts at love are bound by attachment, expectation, and fear of loss. Compassion, by contrast, loves simply because love is the natural expression of freedom. It does not seek to possess or control, but to give and to connect. It is fearless because it knows that even in loss, love remains. When we live in compassion, we live in freedom. The practice of compassion also reveals that freedom is not found in isolation from the world, but in engagement with it. A monk in meditation may taste profound peace, but unless that peace is expressed in compassion for others, it is incomplete. Freedom is tested and proven in the messy, painful, beautiful realities of human life. It is in the marketplace, the workplace, the family, and the community that compassion is needed, and it is there that freedom is most deeply realized. As we reflect on this, we see that the cultivation of compassion is not optional, but essential. Without it, inner freedom risks becoming selfish detachment. With it, freedom becomes a force that benefits all. The awakened heart does not merely escape suffering, but transforms it, not merely for itself, but for the world. Compassion is both the expression of liberation and the path that deepens it endlessly. In the silence of meditation, in the struggles of daily life, in the encounters with friends and strangers, in the face of injustice and in the presence of suffering, compassion is the light that reveals the path. It is the flowering of awareness, the embrace of impermanence, the release of attachment, and the fulfillment of freedom. To cultivate compassion is to live in alignment with the deepest truth of interbeing, that we are all part of one vast web of life, and that to free oneself is to open the way for all beings to be free. If this teaching of compassion has inspired you, and you wish to continue receiving wisdom that nourishes both heart and mind, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. By joining, you walk together with us on the path of awakening, where true freedom blossoms into compassion for all. As the journey toward true inner freedom reaches its final stage, after cultivating awareness, embracing impermanence, releasing attachment, and allowing compassion to blossom, we arrive at the realization of ultimate liberation, the direct experience of freedom as the natural state of being. This is not freedom in the conventional sense of having choices in society or possessing control over circumstances, but a radical liberation from the delusions that imprison the mind. It is the freedom that comes when one awakens to the truth of reality as it is, no longer bound by illusions of permanence, self, or separateness. This realization is what Buddhism calls enlightenment or awakening, and while words can never capture it fully, the teachings point us toward its essence. The deepest prison of the human mind has always been ignorance, the ignorance of who we truly are, the ignorance of the nature of existence, the ignorance that makes us cling to illusions and suffer their inevitable collapse. We live much of our lives in a dream, believing ourselves to be permanent selves, navigating a permanent world, seeking happiness in things that cannot last, fearing losses that are guaranteed, and resisting the flow of life that cannot be stopped. Liberation is the awakening from this dream. When the mind sees clearly, it no longer mistakes the temporary for the eternal, the self for reality, or suffering for destiny. It recognizes the emptiness of clinging and the vastness of awareness itself. This awakening is often described as the realization of non-self or anatta. The belief in a fixed, separate self is perhaps the most powerful illusion. We cling to it fiercely, defending it, comparing it, and constructing elaborate stories around it. Yet when examined closely, the self dissolves into processes, thoughts, sensations, emotions, perceptions, and consciousness, all impermanent and interdependent. Like the flame of a candle, the self appears to be a solid thing, but it is actually a process of constant arising and passing away. To awaken to this truth is to realize that there is no permanent self to defend, no ego to protect, no separate entity to satisfy. With this realization, the burden of self-centered striving falls away, and what remains is spaciousness, openness, and peace. This realization does not lead to nihilism or despair. On the contrary, it opens the door to profound joy. When the illusion of self falls away, we recognize our interconnectedness with all life. We are no longer isolated individuals struggling for survival, but expressions of the vast fabric of existence. The boundaries between self and other dissolve, and compassion flows effortlessly, because we see that others are not truly separate from ourselves. The suffering of another is our suffering. The joy of another is our joy. This interconnectedness is the foundation of the awakened life, a life free from the chains of selfishness and fear. In the experience of ultimate freedom, even the fear of death dissolves. Death, which haunts so much of human life with anxiety and denial, is seen clearly for what it is, the natural transformation of impermanent processes. Just as a wave rises and falls back into the ocean, so too does the individual life arise and dissolve within the vastness of existence. When we are identified with the illusion of a permanent self, death appears as annihilation, a terrifying end. But when we see that there was never a permanent self to begin with, death loses its sting. It is simply a change in the flow of conditions. To live without fear of death is perhaps the greatest freedom of all, for it liberates us to live each moment fully, without clinging, without hesitation, without despair. The awakened mind also recognizes the emptiness of phenomena, or shunyata. This does not mean that things do not exist, but that they do not exist in the way we ordinarily think they do. They are not independent, solid, or permanent. They exist only in interdependence, arising from conditions and passing away when conditions change. This insight frees us from the delusion of solidity and control. It allows us to experience life as a fluid, dynamic process rather than a rigid set of objects to grasp. In this emptiness there is fullness, for the heart is free to embrace all without clinging to any. Awakening also reveals the inherent peace that was always present. The restless mind, chasing desires and fleeing fears, obscures this peace, like clouds obscuring the sky. But when craving and aversion are extinguished, the sky of the mind is revealed in its vastness and clarity. This peace is not dependent on circumstances, not fragile like worldly pleasures, not vulnerable to change. It is the unshakable peace of nibbana, the extinguishing of the fires that cause suffering. To taste even a moment of this peace is to know that true freedom lies not in controlling life, but in awakening to what lies beyond craving and aversion. The path to this realization is gradual, built on the practices already described: mindfulness, meditation, compassion, letting go, and wisdom. Each step weakens the chains of ignorance and strengthens the clarity of vision. Yet awakening is not something distant or foreign. It is the recognition of what has always been true. Awareness is already here, beneath the layers of illusion. Liberation is not a new possession to acquire, but the uncovering of what has always been present. It is like clouds parting to reveal the sky that was never absent. Living with this realization transforms every aspect of life: work, Relationships, challenges, and joys are no longer seen as threats to freedom, but as expressions of it. The awakened person still experiences pleasure and pain, gain and loss, success and failure, but these no longer bind them. They are met with equanimity, the serene balance that arises from seeing all things as impermanent and empty. This equanimity is not indifference but profound stability, a freedom from being tossed about by every wave of circumstance. It allows one to engage with life fully while remaining rooted in peace. This freedom also manifests in boundless compassion. When the illusion of separateness dissolves, there is no longer any barrier to love. One naturally wishes for the happiness of all beings, not as an abstract ideal, but as a felt reality. The awakened heart becomes a refuge for others, radiating kindness without discrimination. In this way, awakening is not only the liberation of the individual, but also a gift to the world. It is the seed of peace, the foundation of harmony, the antidote to suffering. Perhaps the most remarkable quality of ultimate freedom is its ordinariness. It is not a dramatic escape from life, but a clear seeing of life as it is. It is not about supernatural powers or extraordinary experiences, but about being fully present, fully awake, fully free in this very moment. The ordinary acts of eating, walking, speaking, and listening become infused with sacredness when seen through the lens of awakening. Nothing needs to change outwardly. The transformation is entirely inward. The world remains the same, but the way we see it changes completely. For those who aspire to this freedom, the path is both simple and profound. It requires dedication, patience, and humility. It requires letting go again and again, facing illusions again and again, and returning to awareness again and again. It is not a path of escape, but of engagement, not a rejection of life, but a deeper embrace of it. The Buddha's final words to his disciples were, "Be a light unto yourselves." This is the essence of the path, to look within, to see clearly, to awaken to the truth that freedom was always within us, waiting to be realized. When true freedom is realized, life becomes a dance rather than a struggle. Each moment is met with openness, each challenge with courage, each joy with gratitude. Fear dissolves, clinging fades, compassion flows, and peace abides. This is the liberation that Buddhism points toward, not a distant paradise, not a reward in another world, but a freedom available here and now, in the heart of awareness. True freedom lies within you. It always has. The teachings of the Buddha are not prescriptions for becoming something other than what you are, but invitations to awaken to what you already are. Awareness itself, vast, free, and boundless. The prison was never locked. The chains were illusions. The key was always in your hand. To see this clearly, to live this truth, is to discover the freedom that nothing in the world can take away. If you have walked with me through these reflections and felt the call of inner freedom, I invite you now to subscribe to the channel. Together, we will continue to explore the wisdom of awakening, supporting one another on the path toward the boundless liberation that lies within.